Bainbridge there for us. Let's take a zip around what's making news in print and online this morning. We're joined by Ben Oquist, the Executive Director of the think tank, the Australia Institute. Morning, Ben.
Good morning, thanks for having me.
And of course, coronavirus is on all of the front pages today. You started off with a story in the Fin. What have you got?
Yeah, the front page of the Fin Review, Phil Corey is saying that business is now asking for an investment allowance as a kind of alternative to a tax break in the wake of the coronavirus, and the economy needs stimulating. He points out, and Phil points out in his story, that the OECD is wiping somewhere between 0.5% and 1.8% off growth this calendar year in Australia, and businesses saying, well, they think they need an investment allowance, perhaps even before the budget, to get the economy going.
It's interesting because the government has so far only talked about what it describes as targeted relief. The Prime Minister, as of late last week, was saying no to any broader stimulus measures. But I think as events continue to evolve, Ben, they might have to change their perspective on this.
Yes, that word targeted, considered. Paul Kelly points out in The Australian today, though, that yesterday they dropped the use of the word modest in their response that was coming economically. And a lot of talk that they need something before the budget, and they can't wait to the budget. Remember, we've already had an economy that's had its troubles. You know, wage growth in particular has been sluggish.
And this is pre-coronavirus and pre the bushfires. And we're talking about the period leading up to the end of last year.
Yeah, it's why a lot of people are saying our kind of economic debate is a little bit broken, because we haven't caught up with the fact of these new realities, these underlying trends of low wage growth in particular and sluggish demand, and what we can do about them to fix those in a structural sense. And of course, now the coronavirus has come on top of that. And the government's much heralded surplus looks like it won't be there. But a lot of responsible economists saying, well, it shouldn't be there. It shouldn't be chasing it now, particularly in the wake of the coronavirus.
There is an RBA board meeting today, and it's almost locked in. We think that there's going to be another rate cut today, and that's certainly what the markets are putting their hopes on.
Yeah, so we looked at the front page of the business section of the Australian here, because the markets, while the share market was down yesterday, it started off being down a full 3 percentage points, and by the end of the day it was only down 0.8%, this story points out. And that's partly based on the fact of what you were saying, that they're factoring in that the RBA is going to cut interest rates. That's the big story today. It's going to be, will the RBA cut rates? And if they do cut them, then they'll be at a record low of 0.5%, the lowest ever in Australia, lower than the GFC emergency rates. But the market is factoring that in, and the fact that other countries around the world, this story points out, like the Bank of Japan, are talking about doing whatever it takes to get the economy going again.
And certainly in the US, the markets today they're on a tear, actually. The Dow is up 3% last time I checked, and that's because they're now factoring in the Fed is likely to do its own rate cut within the next 2 weeks as well.
Yes, it was an interesting time, though, because, you know, this is taking interest rates to where we're going to have to start talking about quantitative easing or unconventional monetary policy, which then puts the pressure back on the government to do more on the fiscal stimulus side.
And I notice there's a bit of, how should I describe it, expectation management. Papers being briefed by the banks about how much of any rate cut will be passed on, so that'll be a story to watch later today.
Indeed, the story will quickly go to, if there is that rate cut, will the banks pass it on?
Yes, and do they have the political capital to not pass on most, if not all, of the rate cuts? So watch that space. Let's go to the Daily Telegraph. It has a story on some supermarkets facing a rush of shoppers stocking up on those essential supplies.
Yes, I don't know how widespread this is, but there is this story in the Telegraph, and there were some stories online yesterday showing empty shelves, toilet paper and the like running out. It does report that some of the supermarkets say they're putting extra deliveries in to check that the supermarkets have those basic items. The Telegraph here quotes a couple of people who had been shopping to stock up in case of a coronavirus crisis gets worse. I noticed one shopper says at Aldi they couldn't get any organic peas or vegetables.
Oh, no.
And other shoppers are saying it's gone beyond the sanitary products and the bacterial wipes.
Well, my taxi driver this morning was saying that there was a 1 kilometre line outside Costco in Moorabbin on the weekend, of course, where all the bulk items is. But I mean, there is a risk that if we talk about this too much, that it encourages it more and it becomes a self-perpetuating prophecy.
Yes, I mean, I think one thing Australia does have an advantage over some other countries is a general trust of our authorities to tell us accurate and reliable information about what's going on. Unlike some other countries, I know there's a lot of worry about what's being said in both China and by Trump in the US about the coronavirus. So I think, you know, while there might be some panic buying, I think in large people are trusting the authorities here to kind of make wise and modest recommendations, and they're not suggesting we panic buy anything at this stage.
Let's finish, Ben, with The Age. It has a snapshot on the state of the farming sector in Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Chief Commodities Forecaster, or ABARES, is saying that we can no longer rely when predicting weather and rainfall patterns on the long-term 100-year averages. This, of course, because of climate change, and it's now better to look at the last 20 years than the last 100 years. This comes on the back of the report that we at the Australia Institute had out yesterday, showing that summer is now effectively a month longer because of climate change. And this is the nation's chief commodities forecaster, watched a lot by farmers and suppliers about what to do. And it's saying that, for example, in the wheat belt, rainfall's down kind of 50 millimetres per year in those key months, and you can't look at the previous century to work out what the rainfall pattern has been. You're really better looking at the last 20 years. So it underscores, I think, some of those stories are happening now about climate change. It's no longer about what's happening in the future, but what's happening now.
Yeah. Ben, have you changed whether you shake hands or whether you pat someone on the back? Is that going to be something that you're going to do?
No, I do like that foot tapping.
The foot tapping?
Introduction. But no, I'm still shaking hands.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Ben Oquist. Now, many